parents, they made it very clear that they wanted us to be good people and to feel comfortable in that role of being of service to people. And Linda has done an outstanding job.
Linda Tuhiwai Smith wrote this most transformative book, Decolonizing Methodologies. It was published in 1999. There was nothing like it. She wrote a book that made sense to us as Māori and Indigenous peoples. It just met with this huge acclaim here and overseas. It was just incredible.
There's something about the staunchness and the sort of the intellectual power behind that staunchness that means that she creates such a reasonable argument for change that many who would perhaps not listen to others were willing to listen to her.
I was thinking about the American Educational Research Conference, which is one of the largest in the world. Something like 25,000 people attend, and she was the opening speaker one year in Vancouver. We were so proud. The ballrooms were just full of people, standing room only, and it was really like being a rock star, an academic Māori rock star.
Constantly, her work is really in the pursuit of the possible, and she believes in the ability for people to create enduring, sustainable, transformative change.
She has very unique qualities in her ability to empathise with people and to also motivate and inspire them.
She's warm, she's engaging, she has this huge charisma, she's this huge intellectual powerhouse, and she's always steps and steps ahead of us.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome distinguished alumna Professor Linda Tuhiwai Smith. The medallion is presented by Roseanne Baker from the Faculty of Education and Social Work. She's currently a doctoral candidate within Te Whare Wānanga, and her thesis references Linda's work.
Kia ora. Nō hia koe, where are you from?
No Ngāti Porou, no Ngāti Awa, no Tuhourangi aho.
We saw a little flicker of it in that wonderful video. But as the child of teachers, to what extent, dare I ask, did education feature in your childhood?
I tried very hard not to be a teacher. I never wanted to be a teacher. And then one day I thought, well, I'll go to teachers' college. Because they paid us in those days. And I nearly didn't make it because the interview, I think I was interviewed and the person said to me, will you be having a baby soon? And in those days they could ask that question. So I nearly walked out, but then I needed the money, so I stayed.
As a teenager, you had a remarkable experience. You moved to the US as your dad finished his PhD. You were a student of Carbondale Community High School in southern Illinois in the 1960s. What do you remember gave you culture shock the most?
Pretty much everything. I came out of a girls' boarding school, Waikato Diocesan, to a community high school. Carbondale was co-ed, didn't know anyone. The schools in that town had just been desegregated. So in the cafeteria, the black students sat at one end, the white students sat at the other end, and all us others, of which there are about 8, sat in the middle. And most of them thought I was strange and that I was Native American because of my accent. So it took a while to navigate the politics, but at the other end of it, I had the most wonderful teachers. They transformed me because I'd come out of such a conservative system. They made me believe I could think.
Did it make you perhaps more deeply consider your own identity? Having identity being so stark in that kind of environment?
I always knew my Māori identity, so that was never an issue for me. But it did, my time in the US, the 1960s, was a civil rights movement, the American Indian movement, so I became very aware of Indigenous issues, issues around race and racism, issues around exclusion. Those weren't taught in school, but they were lived in the community that I lived in.
In what ways did it make you think about injustice from a Māori perspective?
When I was in the US, I didn't think about that from a Māori perspective, but the day I walked into a secondary school here in Auckland, the Māori girls were in the back. They got into trouble on my first assembly for being loud, and I just kind of knew from then that wasn't right. I got put into an academic class because things were streamed, and there were no Māori girls in that class. It was just me, and I ran down, basically Mirasazi was the Māori teacher, and she taught in the basement. So when I could, I would run away and hide out in her classroom, and she was pretty fierce. Those of you who may have remembered her, but she was also very loving. So I survived that secondary school for a year, and then came on to university.
In the 1970s, you joined Ngā Tamatoa, which is a Māori activist group, I believe, started at the University of Auckland. You went into some pretty hostile environments to talk about Te Tiriti o Waitangi. How were you received?
Hostilely.
What does that look like?
Actually, it was very polite hostility in schools because we spoke at assemblies, and of course, in those days, teachers had complete control of assemblies, so no one was allowed to move. So we got to deliver our message. We were booed, we were told by teachers we didn't know what we were talking about, but we had a message and we wanted to give that message. So part of my role was to talk to school assemblies, but I also talked to the Remuera ladies group, and an early childhood kindergarten group. So we moved around Auckland, talking about the Treaty of Waitangi, why it should be honoured, talking about racism even, and about justice. Most people at the time gave you the time of day. And I think this is when I thought I could educate people, because they listened. And we knew how to escape quickly as well.
Do you not feel like people listen now?
I think we're at a time where it's hard to get some of those fundamental messages across. I think society at the moment has got some real extreme views and extreme hostility. A lot of that is played out on social media, but also, as a university teacher, it's also in our students.
Explain what you mean by that point.
Well, one of the things that my husband and I had to do was teach about the Treaty of Waitangi to 100 level education students, and in the end, what we started to do was say, now we're going to talk to you about the Treaty of Waitangi. It's an important part of our history. And some of you are going to react to that here. And our job is to get you to think about it here. And we're going to give you the theoretical tools to do that.
You spoke about the disparity in streaming in schools for Māori students. And throughout your career, you have very, very deliberately sought to seek out space for Māori within education. What progress have you seen in that time?
I see progress everywhere. It's not as rapid, it's not as intense as I would like to have seen, but I think there has been a generational change. The introduction of kohanga reo, kura kaupapa Māori, Wānanga, stronger reo in mainstream schools, kura iwi, all these alternatives did not exist 30, 40 years ago. What they've done is educate more than a generation now of young Māori who can believe in themselves, who are successful, who have come on to university, who are in a range of careers, who contribute positively to society. And I think what that shows is you don't have to choose whether you're to be successful and not Māori. And yet that was what, in my era of going to university in the 70s, that's what it felt like we had to do. And we were given direct messages like, you know, leave your Māori stuff at home. Or things like, I was told, it must be the white side of you that got you into university. And I never knew, I never had a white side. I mean, you might think I'm a bit pale, but, you know, those messages were cruel and mean. They put off a lot of people, and they made people like me more determined.
You see progress everywhere.
Yeah.
Strikes me that right now, this year, dare I say, some proposed moves from some political parties who shall remain nameless might be perceived in some quarters as challenging the notion of progress. How do you see this moment for Te Iwi Māori?
Well, I think, yes, we have a government that's trying to throw us back 30 years, but we're not like that 30 years ago as a people. We're a different people now. We're a stronger people. We're a stronger society. We have allies. And we have a strong young people's generation. And if you look at our demographic profile, you know, in a few decades, Māori and Pacific will be the majority in this country.
Will you allow me one little provocation?
Yeah.
Much of your work focuses on decolonising knowledge and systems. Dare I suggest that on occasion you are being celebrated by the very systems you critique? How does that sit with you?
Great. I mean, you know, it's not about being anti-knowledge or anti-research or anti-insight. You know, what I've been on about is, number one, our people were researchers. You can't cross the Pacific Ocean without doing your homework. And that's what our tipuna did. They were observers of the environment. They were observers of the world. And so, you know, one of the things I think is important when I'm teaching Indigenous students is remember all cultures have knowledge. All cultures have a way of protecting that knowledge, preserving that knowledge, and transmitting that knowledge. And the challenge that we have in New Zealand and in other countries is how, in our respect for knowledge, do we make sure we respect other forms of knowledge? And how, as Māori, do we use knowledge? Do we use our mātauranga and use the knowledge that we learn, you know, in other disciplines to make our lives better? that's what I think it's about. It's about advancing our dreams. It's about imagining big imaginations. Because when I watch young Māori, they want the world. They don't want a bit of the world. They're like any other young person. They want to know that that's unlimited. And we need an education system that makes that possible. When I was educated, it didn't make that possible. In order to get this part of the world, you had to sacrifice this part. And we don't need to do that anymore.
I don't know if you've had business cards printed recently, but they're going to get awfully complicated because I think there are now 2 distinguished you need to put before your name. Please join me in congratulating distinguished alumnus, distinguished Professor Linda Tuhiwai Smith.
Thank you.
Let's Tātou e te